Why Qatar?
Au Qatar.
Pour le Qatar.
Qatar?
I think in general, the media coverage is just basically saying Qatar and the wider Middle East is a bad place and people shouldn't go there. This kind of attack that we've seen, I think the role it's playing is trying to put people off coming to Qatar. It's trying to increase this notion that there should be a boycott and that if people come here, they'll be subjected to rules that are completely unreasonable, like they have to cover if they're a woman, they won't be able to hold hands, all these kind of things. I think in general, the media coverage is just basically saying Qatar and the wider Middle East is a bad place and people shouldn't go there. So I think that's what it's doing.
لكن بشكل عام مثلا لم نقرأ كثيرا عن الإصلاحات التي قامت في قطر.
So I think the stuff about reforms, the labor reforms, any of the political reforms, or the fact that this will be the first World Cup where we have women referees, these things don't really make the news because they're not sensationalist. They're not hugely negative stories. In the social media age, one of the big news values is shareability. How much will this be shared on social media? How many hits will it get? I analysed about 1,700 headlines that mentioned the word Qatar because I wanted to see what the associations were. What I found is 40% of all headlines in British papers that mention Qatar also mention the World Cup. So what this shows is that much of people's perceptions of Qatar only relate to the World Cup. And of that 40%, 60% were negative, and there were very few positives. There were some that were neutral. But the majority of the coverage, about 36%, focused on labour rights, about 20% focused on having Qatar stripped of the World Cup, and a lesser percentage focused on LGBTQ issues. So we've heard different numbers. 37 deaths are linked to the construction of stadiums. That's linked to the construction. That's not direct deaths on stadiums. The direct death number on stadiums is 3.
الحملة التي تتعرض لها قطر تدخل ضمن عقدة إنه انتقاد الصغير.
But actually this is a really important point about Qatar's size. And actually there have been studies done on representations of small countries, right? So one of the issues is that countries that are smaller tend to be portrayed more negatively in the Western press. I did a comparison, for example, between the coverage of Russia and the coverage of Qatar. The Russia World Cup and the Qatar World Cup. How many articles were written about Qatar in total? Well, about 1,710 years. How many articles were written about Russia? 15,000. Of course, because Russia's big. But only 3% of all the articles about Russia had the World Cup and Russia in the headline, whereas Qatar it was 40%. So I think what we're seeing is not about just producing and reinforcing stereotypes. That's what we're seeing in the media. When we see this cartoon of the Qatari team as terrorists, that's reinforcing these stereotypes. But the net product of all these media representations are a product of Orientalism. The double standards are about why is Qatar being singled out. Qatar has a huge migrant workforce, for example. Migrant abuses are rife throughout Europe. This is no secret. But the problem is, it's like now in the UK, for example, if you're an asylum seeker, you can get deported to Rwanda. You know, you have migrant workers picking fruit in the UK who complain that they have accommodation without running water and these kind of things. I'm not saying that the scale of the abuse is the same, but at the same time, the double standards lie in saying, okay, UK has these problems, Qatar has these problems. But why does the problems in Qatar mean it shouldn't get the World Cup? And why with the UK, for example, is it fine?